Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. We come now in our ongoing series, The Bible in 5 Minutes, to the first epistle of John. And the truth of the matter is, from here on in, things are going to get really difficult for me and mildly slippery. These are not the easiest writings to understand, those which remain yet for us to cover. Let me say this clearly about what we know about 1 John. It is almost certain that 1 John was written by John, who is also the author of 2 John, 3 John, the Gospel of John, and Revelation. And that this John is the son of Zebedee, one of the 12 disciples. That much we know. Even when it comes to the timing of the writing of John and other epistles or writings of John, there are those who tend to push for a post or end of the first century date, and I really have significant trouble with that, in large part because I'm persuaded of the real, genuine likelihood that the whole of the canon was finished by 70 AD in the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, I don't have time today to go into a defense of that idea, nor am I the best one to do that, but there are people that I've studied and trust who do make that argument, and I think they're just about right. So, my guess is sometime in the late 60s, maybe 67 AD is about the time that this was written. It has been a regular part of our understanding of John's epistles, including the first epistle, to see them as a response to some sort of early form of Gnosticism. And there's a reason for that. We do know that Gnosticism became a significant and powerful counterfeit to the Christian faith in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, up to the even the 4th century. And that this battle was a significant battle. And again, the typical approach to John is that he saw some of the early seeds of Gnosticism and was dealing with them. Well, maybe not. I'm not so sure. I don't know if we can even recognize something as early sort of proto-Gnosticism, because it's just hard to say. Nevertheless, John's first epistle here does have points that do push against later Gnosticism as well, but I think that may be more of a coincidence than anything else. Or maybe God had him write it in preparation for future challenges that would come into the church. What I do know is that John's letter is, how do I put this? It is not easily dissected. It's not easy to take it and divide it up into clear sections and portions. It's not like a relay race where paragraph 1 hands the baton on to paragraph 2, which hands the baton on to the next and on to the next, and you can see the flow of the thinking. All of the biblical writers have this same issue to one extent or another. I'm not complaining about them, but even Paul himself, who was profoundly systematic, from time to time gets so deep into beautiful and sound theology that he breaks into moments of doxology. Well, John is trying to encourage God's people. It's certainly the case that this is likely written in the context of a departure from the church for one reason or another, which is one of the reasons why we have as one of our proof texts against a view of apostasy that would see it as someone actually losing genuine saving faith is John saying here in this book, if they left us, they were never of us. Well, apparently there were a number of people that left, and that's one of the things that they're dealing with. If you were to try to find an overarching theme for the whole book, it would probably be this. John is talking to us about what demonstrates the reality of saving faith. What demonstrates the reality of saving faith. And interestingly, he uses some language that can be very hard for people, very challenging, because on the one hand, he seems to suggest that anyone who practices sin doesn't have saving faith. And on the other hand, he says anyone who doesn't acknowledge their sin doesn't have the truth in them. And it can read, if you read in a sort of haphazard kind of casual way, like a contradiction. And I want to take the last moments that I have to deal with that. John is very much concerned with people who claim to be believers, who are living in sin, practicing sin without any sense of repentance. This would include people who are guilty of living an adulterous lifestyle, or any kind of ongoing sexual immorality that is without repentance. That's the thing that marks out someone who doesn't have saving faith. But people who fall into sin, who commit this sin or that sin and respond in repentance, are in fact not only considered to be believers, but if you deny that that describes you, then that's another reason to worry about whether or not you're a believer. Well, I'm sorry that I haven't given you a more linear exposition on the book of John in the moment that we've had, but that's a brief introduction to him. And please pray for me as I continue to move on through the rest of the New Testament. We come now to question number 97 in our ongoing series on the Westminster Shorter Catechism. And as you recall, we have been in a segment of the Shorter Catechism that tends to deal with issues related to sacraments. And this is actually the last of that sort of subsection. Question 97 asks this: what is required to the worthy receiving of the Lord's Supper? What is required of the worthy receiving of the Lord's Supper? The answer is, it is required of them that would worthily partake of the Lord's Supper, that they examine themselves of their knowledge to discern the Lord's body, of their faith to feed upon him, of their repentance, love, and new obedience, lest, coming unworthily, they eat and drink judgment to themselves. All through this segment, or this series that we have been doing, I have been almost universally praising the Westminster Divines for both their ability to be concise and their ability to be precise. And I want to suggest that here they've done it again, and in fact they have hit a level of precision that is actually often missing in those who are reading this and propounding this. Listen to the question again. What is required to the worthy receiving of the Lord's Supper? Listen to what it doesn't say. Who is worthy to receive the Lord's Supper? I'm not sure if this is still practiced, but in some circumstances it has in the history of the church, including the church in Scotland that embraced the Westminster Confession. Part of the process was that the pastor would ask you before the service if you were worthy, and then if you affirmed yes, and if he agreed, you were given a token that allowed you to come and participate in the supper. But if you read the answer, what you discover is the only way to worthily partake, or to worthily receive, or to worthily come, is to acknowledge your unworthiness. You have to acknowledge that you're not worthy. The Lord's Supper is not a reward for those who have done well. It is a balm to those who know they have done poorly. The whole function of examining ourselves is not so that we come out the other side thinking well of ourselves. And in fact, if we do, then we've done a poor job of examining ourselves. We're supposed to examine ourselves. Again, praise to the Westminster Divines, that they examine themselves of their knowledge to discern the Lord's body. I would suggest that what we're supposed to learn as we examine ourselves is that we're the ones who crucified this body. And then we're to look to see if we have the faith to feed upon him. What does that mean? The faith to feed upon him is not believing in yourself. The faith to feed upon him is the acknowledgement of our own, again, unworthiness. Lord, I need your mercy. I depend upon your mercy. This is all I have. I've got nothing to bring to the table. Of their repentance. That's what it says, of their repentance. How can you think yourself worthy and be repentant at the same time? Or how can you be repentant and think yourself worthy? You can't. We're supposed to discern our faith to feed upon him, our repentance, love, and new obedience. This is what happens. This is what repentance is. It is an acknowledging of our sin. It is a rejoicing in and celebrating in his grace. And it is endeavoring to grow in obedience and righteousness. And when we don't do that, we come unworthily. When we do that, we come unworthy. Are you tracking with me now? When we don't acknowledge our sin and his provision and our zeal for obedience, then we're coming unworthily. When we acknowledge that we are unworthy, we are coming worthily. Not because we're worthy, but because he is. That's what it means to discern his body. I'm not here because of my worthiness. I'm here because of this body broken for me. Oh, my friends. If ever there was a successful twisting of the message of the gospel tied to the sacraments, it's here. Where we think the Lord's Supper is something that you attain. That you climb to. That you... No. Eating the bread, drinking the wine, is receiving the answer of Jesus to our cry as we beat our breasts, saying, Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner. The bread and the wine is Jesus saying, we are now home and justified. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.